American Football Stories is brought to you by Coach Paint. Coach Paint is a great tool that allows us to add graphics to player highlight clips similar to the graphics you see on TV. Coach Paint offers the ability to clearly tellustrate video while increasing retention of information in a shorter amount of time. Up your game with Coach Paint today.
What time is it? Game time! It's gonna be special. They gonna talk about this forever.
Welcome to American Football Stories.
Puts his head down, crashes and spins, and dives. Touchdown!
Bringing together the many perspectives that make up college football in the NFL.
Football is one of the greatest sports ever invented.
From players and coaches.
Believe, baby, believe, baby.
Hey, we playing to win right here, fellas.
To the front office and scouts.
The public is finally beginning to catch up, but they don't even know half the truth.
Us against the world, let's get it.
Your hosts, Robert Parker and Nick Knudsen, bring you American Football Stories.
Welcome to the American Football Stories podcast, brought to you by Coach Paint. Today is March 10th, 2021. I'm your host, Nick Knudsen, and I'm typically joined by Robert Parker, but we're going to do a solo pod this week. Robert's actually in Indianapolis at the National Scouting Combine, so I'm sure they'll have some interesting results to report back on his time out in Indy. But lots to catch up on in the college football world. We didn't want to hold back, so we're going to jump right out of the gate, talk about Les Miles being out at Kansas. I don't have a ton to say on that exit. I mean, it's obviously a disastrous exit, a really disastrous tenure at Kansas. I think 3 wins in 2 years. Not a great hire from Jeff Long. I mean, just listening to people in the industry talk about it over the last couple days here, doesn't sound like Les really impressed at many other job interviews around the country before going to Kansas. And ends up getting the Kansas job due to a connection with Jeff Long, the athletic director, back to their Michigan days in the 90s. Well, apparently Les had some skeletons in the closet. Situation at LSU has come out about some different levels, various allegations of sexual harassment, and it's really, I mean, we're in a day and age where you can't have that type of stuff. Obviously, it's amazing that even as detailed as some of the things are, how much got swept under the rug seemingly at LSU that this wouldn't raise any red flags in the first place. So coming out from a while ago, we know now Les Miles out at Kansas. Jeff Long, after insisting he would make the hire, follows shortly after earlier today. Announces he is out as athletic director at Kansas, probably for the best for the football program, at least. We're obviously not huge college basketball guys, but Kansas Jayhawks obviously known for their basketball more than their football. But I look at a program like Kansas, similar to Duke, Kentucky, UCLA, anyway, these programs that can dominate in one sport. And I'm obviously going back some time on UCLA, probably shouldn't throw them in there. They've been struggling in basketball over the last decade and a half anyway. But really, I never understand how a program can have it so figured out on one side and just so not figured out on the other. And you might be like, well, hey, they're obviously not allocating the resources for that. Okay. But still, these days, if you get someone that's halfway decent, you think you could have an accidental okay season every now and then. And Kansas has just been an utter disaster really since the departure that Orange Bowl team. I think they had an 8-5 season the year after the Orange Bowl back in the Mark Mangino days. But since Mangino's departure, it's been dark times for Kansas football. And I got to admit, I liked the Les Miles hire when he was brought in at KU. I didn't think it was going to be anything like, we're going to see him win 10 games, but you would at least think that on name recognition alone, which is, by the way, probably why the hire was made, he could recruit a halfway decent product in there and at least get some players in there that Kansas wasn't previously accustomed to getting. So I'm talking like maybe some solid 3-star kids, maybe a 4-star here or there getting in there, and Kansas becoming competitive. I mean, I really see Kansas as a type of program where why are you not bowl eligible on a regular basis? If I'm running that program at Kansas, that is my goal. I am trying to get to a bowl game every single year. And with the way you can schedule, I mean, look, I know Coastal Carolina had a good program this year, but the way they demolished Kansas on opening night, which I assume is the most of what people watched of Kansas football this year, unless your team is like Oklahoma or some of these programs that play Kansas regularly. Unless you're a Kansas Jayhawks fan or you're a fan of the Big 12 watching Kansas football, you probably watch that Coastal Carolina game, and that's about it this year. And that's only because that was on when Pac-12 After Dark is supposed to be on. Coastal Carolina, the first exposure to them this year, just waxed them. And they beat them the year before, although it was a lot closer. And it raised a couple eyebrows. But then Miles, they had that Friday night in Boston where they went and they beat Boston College, and you thought, maybe there's something there. Maybe there's something there. I don't know how many of y'all tuned in to watch that ESPN. I believe it was ESPN Plus documentary series called Miles to Go. I'm guilty of watching several episodes of that just because I find Les Miles as a character in college football to be somewhat fascinating. But he's just, I figured that would be an entertaining watch. And it was a little bit, I fell off of watching it because, it was kind of like, it was cheesy. You could tell that there wasn't a lot of real analysis of the program. It was all about like how great Kansas football can be. It's just, it was a little cheesy. I fell off of it. But when they got that win over Boston College, you felt like this is what they can do. This is the type of program Kansas can be. They can beat those Boston colleges. Oklahoma State shouldn't roll you every year. I mean, you shouldn't get rolled by Texas Tech every year. You should be able to put up games against these teams that, I'm not asking you to beat Oklahoma. I'm not asking you to beat Texas, but go make Baylor sweat once in a while. Kansas State, that's your arch rival. Every single year, compete with Kansas State. I just named 3 programs that have had some good teams, or 4 programs that have had some good teams there. That's where you should be if you're Kansas. You should be up at that level. Again, all those teams, what do they do regularly? These days, they're making bowl games. And there's really no reason if you schedule well. So aside from the Coastal Carolina disaster we're talking about this past year, you should win those games. I mean, you should schedule. You can't. But the problem is, Kansas can't even get out of their own way. They lose to South Dakota State. They lose to North Dakota State. They have FCS losses. So get you that FCS game. Learn how to beat Sun Belt teams, and then win a couple games a year in the Big 12, and boom, you're going bowling. I'm not asking you to be super competitive, but that's if you just want to do the bare minimum at Kansas, in my opinion, because you can't accept the program the way it is. You can't, if you're there, you don't just accept that we're Kansas. If you're Oklahoma, you look at Kansas and go, they're never going to be anything. But if you're at Kansas, you don't look at yourself that way. You got to look at yourself as a winner. You got to try to win, right? You know how to win in basketball. I don't know a whole lot about the facility situation there in Lawrence, but I've heard great things about the Lawrence campus. You got to think a program that knows how to build a national title contender in basketball on a regular basis knows they can apply some of that same logic and get there with football. Maybe not on a national title scale. Obviously, that's a big, big jump. But just talking bowl games here. So, Kansas football, I think it's time to go outside the box. I'm very much with Andy Staples put this out there. But we interviewed him on this show. Head coach Kevin Kelly out of Pulaski Academy. Andy Staples wrote an awesome piece on The Athletic, basically telling Kansas, go out there and think different. Kevin Kelly, for those of you who don't know, he's statistically driven guy. He uses all of his data. I mean, little things like throwing on first down, because if you get more than 4 yards on first down, there's X% chance of scoring. The types of routes they run that can lead to bigger plays, like every bit of the game. I mean, famously, he doesn't punt, And I think he said he's punted like 7 times in the last 10 years or something like that. And he kicks onside kicks after every kickoff and goes for 2. So how many people would watch Kansas football on a weekly basis if they were playing that style of football? You know, I hear people throw out Jeff Monken's name from Army. Okay. Like, I mean, Monken probably would do a good job there, but people want them to go with the triple option. I'm not as in love with the triple option. I understand why you would suggest that. Certainly there's a culture with the triple option that out there that, I mean, you see that Navy, Army do it. Georgia Tech did it real well, but Georgia Tech was rooted in Georgia Southern. And really, you could say Navy with Paul Johnson, Navy, Army basically copied Navy. So Army, Navy, and Georgia Tech were all from that Georgia Southern triple option scheme. And Georgia Tech, for as tough as of a watch as they were from time to time, they were mighty competitive year in and year out in the ACC with the triple option attack. So I know Jeff Collins is trying to rebrand that program and everything, but they have not seen near the success that Paul Johnson saw during his time in Atlanta. So as much as you want to hate on the style and you want to talk about it being boring, which I'm probably more in that camp if I'm being honest, I don't love it. It is effective. You can't argue with the effectiveness of it. I mean, I should be way more into the Army Navy game than I am. And I know the tradition's rich, and I've seen a game at West Point. I'd love to go to Annapolis for a game sometime, and I really want to go to the Army Navy game at some point. But the quality of football on the field, that's a different story with the triple option. 2 triple option teams, it's not an awesome watch. I mean, I don't know if we're allowed to say that or not, but I mean, it's like, because I mean, really, it is fun when you see Army go into, you know, Norman a couple of years ago and take Oklahoma to overtime, take Michigan to double overtime. Navy certainly given top teams headaches before. You know, it's fun when you watch it against a big team and some team that has no business competing with some of these bigger teams with better athletes. Just give them hell on the triple option all day. That's fun when it's working, but when it doesn't work, man, we saw some ugly days for Georgia Tech, but we saw some big blowouts for them too. And I use Georgia Tech as the example because you take it back to Kansas, and Kansas can play that level of football if you got the right pieces in there with the triple. I think that's totally possible in Lawrence. You would at least talk about, if we're talking about making bowl games year in and year out, yeah, you'd be a bowl team. Maybe every once in a while you pull an upset over Texas and Oklahoma. Like, you know, I'm talking about once or twice a decade, and maybe you make that run. Maybe you have a magical Iowa State type season, like, you know, where you make a run to the Big 12 title game even. But there will be a cap on the program, and I know that doesn't sound like that a problem right now. Like, I mean, most Kansas fans would probably die to go 9-3 and get to a certain level, but when you get to that level and you know that that's your ceiling, and you know that we're not making the playoff, we're never making the playoff with this, we're never doing any of this stuff. It sounds like a silly piece of conversation, I know, but that's what happened at Georgia Tech. They didn't get rid of Paul Johnson because he wasn't getting it done. They wanted the next level. They felt like they could go to the next level if they ran this type of system or had this type of coach or were able to recruit this type of athlete, you know. And what you're seeing at Georgia Tech with some of the freshmen that came in, I know they haven't put on the record yet, but Jeff Sims out of Jacksonville, one-time FSU commit, Norvell says no thanks, goes up to Atlanta, had some promising games. He struggled a bit, was a true freshman, but Jamar Gibbs looks like one of the better running backs in the country up there in Atlanta. And even when they had the triple option system cooking and the rushing game was great at Georgia Tech, when was the last time you ever said Georgia Tech had one of the best running backs in the country? I mean, they had Calvin Johnson up there at receiver under Paul Johnson. They had a couple good receivers up there, and certainly they've had good running backs, but are we talking like, I mean, Gibbs looks like a different dude. He looks like a different dude. So, I mean, I think Jeff Collins, give him some time there, he could build that program into something really interesting. And that, I think Kansas should have the courage. The triple option is an easy solution, I feel like, to become competitive sooner than later. And maybe you're so desperate you want to go that route. But if you go that route, You're fully invested in that route. And if you decide you want to undo it, like Georgia Tech's doing, that's another 2 or 3 years of undoing. I say if you're Kansas, you just have the courage now to go out and hire a guy. I'm much more on the Andy Staples piece. Go for the Kevin Kelly. Go for a guy who coaches differently, who's going to come in, he's going to run a wide open offense that's going to be fascinating to watch. He's going to do things that we've never seen at the FBS level in college football. We know that the concepts work. College football and the NFL. I mean, think about how many fourth downs you see teams go for nowadays. You don't see that. You didn't see that much when I was growing up. I mean, if a coach went for a 4th and 2 at the 50-yard line once in a while, people thought he was insane. They thought they loved it, but they thought it was crazy. But now you're seeing that more and more because the statistics are backing it up. The data is backing it up. And these guys, as analytics become more accepted, we got to open our minds to someone like Kevin Kelly. Instead of looking at this guy as a total outsider or someone who's just doing crazy stuff, when are we going to look at the results the guy gets? The guy gets unbelievable results. He just won another state championship this year. I believe that's 9 state titles. I'm sorry if I'm shortening, Coach Kelly, but I believe you're up to nine state titles now there at Pulaski Academy in Arkansas. And why not have the courage? Have the courage to go out and get that. Are you worried you're going to be worse off than you were now? Because I don't see that being an issue. I don't see that being an issue at all. I think it'd be highly watchable football from day one. And if he gets a staff, was able to assemble a staff with some familiarity with recruiting and everything, if he went out and got a couple ace recruiters on that staff, that would be a fun team to watch over the next couple of years. So they got to hire an athletic director first. We'll see what direction they end up going. But Kansas, fresh start, they definitely need it. So bye-bye to Les Miles. Bye-bye to Jeff Long, both out in Lawrence. And I hope Kansas does something interesting. I don't think they will, but I'm totally with Andy Staples. Go hire Kevin Kelly. Someone have the guts to do it at least. Kansas, why not? What do you got to lose, man? You don't have that Greg Schiano option like Rutgers just pulled out of the hat this year. So let's move on. We're going to talk about the Rush Propst tape down in Georgia. A little bit of high school football. The former Hoover, Alabama coach, Hoover High School and Alabama coach, known from his MTV days, Russ Propst. He's on tape talking about how much Georgia pays players, how much Alabama pays players. A lot of interesting little nuggets on that tape. But if I set out it's surprising that someone's got it on tape. I'm not surprised that it's out there. There's so much to the system of college football that is just completely messed up, completely screwy, but we just accept it because that's the way things have been, type of deal. And we're slowly getting changes. I'm not 100% sure what the right moves are in terms of everything. I love that they're opening up all the NIL stuff is great, where guys can get opportunities to get paid outside the school and everything for name, image, likeness for those NIL. For those of you who might not know, that's kind of coming into effect this summer. Really, you're going to start to see that in some states, and really with the NCAA, I think they're going to have to make a ruling on that sooner than later to expand it. But that's coming. Within the next few years, that's going to be commonplace across the country. So where does that leave us in terms of Alabama and Georgia? Well, I think the NCAA, you go back to the SMU situation where they gave them the death penalty back in the day. And I don't think I'm saying anything dramatically new here, but they went so hard on SMU. We haven't seen anywhere near that situation again, even though you've seen, I think the total amount of money that SMU ended up getting the death penalty for was under $70,000, which is just absolute peanuts compared to the money that flows through college football today. But it's not good for business if you smack Georgia too hard or smack Alabama too hard. So it's a matter of these guys all have systems, this underweb of systems. And, one of my favorite reporters in college football is Stephen Godfrey, where he talks about the underbelly of college football all the time. And really, there's so much we don't know as fans. and we just accept it and we don't really talk about it too much. We just kind of know it's there. Nobody thinks that their program is totally clean. Nobody thinks that their program is completely above board. There's stuff going on. If you're remotely competitive in football, you are doing something. That's got to be the attitude, right? We're beyond these days of, well, not my program, or like, well, this coach runs a clean program. Da da da. I do think there are guys who do it the right way in general, but there's a whole lot that we don't know in that world, and I'm okay. I'm one of the types. I'm okay not knowing to some extent. I also would like to just know everything at the same time. So I know I'm not going to know everything, because I mean, you're talking about, I would like to know how every bit of detail about how the mafia works, but you're only going to hear that once in a while when some guy speaks up when he's on trial. Like, you don't get all those details all the time. So even though you'd like to know, you're not going to know. But with college football, there is a trade-off. You accept that it's there. You know that it's there. But do I believe that every recruit takes money? No, because I think there's some recruits that come from families where they don't need it. It's not a priority for them. They really do want to focus on where they want to go to school. I think that there's individual motivations across the board. And you think about Alabama could let's hypothetically say Alabama comes with a bag, offers you a bag to go to Bama, but you could start at Tennessee. Like, why wouldn't you? Maybe that's your priority. You want to start it, so you go to Tennessee. You want to start right away. So I don't think that it's so. This is just fun fodder to talk about. It's fun conversation. A guy like Russ Probst trying to keep his name out there in the news a little bit, probably with this, maybe a leaked tape, quote unquote. But I'm not surprised. Not. It doesn't raise too many eyebrows. What's going on at Georgia? What is interesting, though, the one thing I will say, what's interesting about Georgia being brought up is we heard Georgia kind of whispered about during the whole Tennessee scandal, where there was some whispers about Georgia and Tennessee getting a little sloppy on their recruiting trail. So the difference is Kirby Smart is winning a lot of football games in Athens. Jeremy Pruitt wasn't. We saw what happened with Jeremy Pruitt. Kirby is very much okay in Athens and very much recruiting at a high level still. But man, I just would love to know, like, let's just everyone come clean. Like, I wish there was a day where everyone could come clean and just be like, okay, like, how does recruiting actually work with these guys? Like, what are we actually doing? Is this really a bidding war for this guy or that guy? Like, what really happened? Like, penalty free, everybody comes clean and just tells it like it is. It'll never happen, but I would love for that day to just, like, that would be fascinating. That would be great TV. Just like have a week of unveiling. Okay, here's how each SEC school lures recruits. Just have a week of that on the SEC network, and I think you did great ratings with it. So let's NCAA, if you can just clear your rule book out, and we could talk about the old way of recruiting, versus whatever new way is going to come up to entice people whenever these archaic rules are finally removed. But there's so many complications. Is everyone just talks about the paying the players and everything like it's just a football issue, and maybe it's something the schools hide behind to an extent, but I do believe it is a complicated issue when you talk about something like Title IX. I mean, you look at when Title IX went into effect, how many men's sports in general were cut across the board. There are a lot of men's sports that don't. There's a lot. Go look at a lot of the schools that offer women's sports that don't. How many men's volleyball teams are out there? Most schools have a women's volleyball team, though. And hey, Title IX is fantastic. But you're not supposed to give to one what you don't give to the other type of deal. And it's very rigorous like that. It's rigorously applied. And does that mean the star quarterback makes the same as the third string center, who makes the same as the backup catcher on the softball team? I don't know what that means in terms of paying players. So that's why I think the NCAA model of paying, find a way to put money in some of these players' pockets is pretty difficult. I think you see it in indirect ways with how much they've invested in facilities. Even like players get access to dining halls that regular students don't get access to at some of these schools. They get different amenities that other people don't get. So I know it's, in terms of paying straight cash, it's a pretty difficult proposition. But on the other hand, the numbers are just so astronomical with how much just the TV contracts alone are making in college football these days. There's absolutely a way to shuffle some money around and figure this out. So I think we got a long road to go on this way. I only wanted to bring it up in terms of paying players. I only wanted to bring it up because of the Rush Propst tape this week, though. So interesting story, but it's not going to change anything. Bama and Georgia will be fine. They will be recruiting the way they normally do, and so will everyone else. So there's a reason why a lot of these guys don't rat on each other, because a lot of them are doing the same thing. I mean, it's just common sense. It's common sense. But at any rate, big topic for tonight. Wrote an article on this. It's going to come out on readandreaction.com, site I write for with Will Miles, if you haven't checked it out. Mostly Florida Gator content, but we do get outside of Florida. We try to get a little bit outside Florida sometimes. But if you're a Florida Gator fan, highly, highly recommend checking out Will Miles. He also does Gators Breakdown podcast with Gator Dave on a regular basis. Also fantastic stuff. Definitely check that stuff out. But I tend to write about SEC or national level stuff on the Read and Reaction site. An article I got coming up is, what does the group of 5 need to do, assuming the playoff doesn't expand? How can the group of 5 enhance their chances of at least being considered for a playoff spot? I am by no means an advocate of just handing an undefeated group of 5 team a playoff spot, but when you have a year like we did this year, right? Like, I mean, not even all the teams college football are playing. Even at the FBS level, some teams opted out of playing the entire season. How do 2 unbeaten FBS teams warrant zero consideration for the playoffs? And I'm talking about Cincinnati and Coastal Carolina, who both finished the season undefeated. Just not even remotely in the conversation. And we were given a playoff that consisted of Notre Dame playing Alabama and Ohio State playing Clemson. Ohio State and Clemson is a matchup we've seen over and over again. Almost it's getting as regular as Alabama and Clemson almost. And Notre Dame, you're not there at that level. Notre Dame, you're not. Now, if you go 12-0, if you're undefeated and you earn it, all good. But they got waxed in the ACC title game, and there wasn't even a conversation about maybe undefeated Cincinnati should get it. There wasn't even a conversation about it. So, despite being bringing 2 unbeaten teams to the table, the group of 5 didn't really receive any consideration from the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. And this was the year to do it, too, because we saw Notre Dame get ragdolled once again in the playoffs. And, you played Alabama close. Like, Alabama didn't take their foot off the gas. Just Notre Dame on that level, they can step up if they play really well. They can hang, but they got to play a near perfect game. And if they don't play near perfect, they played awesome against Clemson. And I know Clemson was missing a lot of guys that night, but DJ Uiagalelei, he's going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the country this coming year. And I think Notre Dame played great the night they beat Clemson, and that's absolutely what got them in the playoffs. But still, they played their A game. They don't show up with their A game, they're not on that level. Ohio State, I was one of the critics of Ohio State being included in the playoffs. I personally, full disclosure, from Columbus, Ohio originally. My family loves Ohio State. I grew up loving Ohio State. We root for the Buckeyes, but you play 6 games. I didn't think it was worthy. I was on the Dabo train on that, where Dabo shouldn't have been saying it. He should shut up. But you had a bunch of games canceled. Not debating whether or not the Buckeyes were talented enough, but you only had 6 games. They silenced people like me, people like Dabo. They definitely earned their spot. In retrospect, I'm willing to admit I was wrong about that. The Buckeyes absolutely deserve to be there. I wasn't saying it because of talent, though. I just didn't think 6 games should be rewarded. So, coronavirus season, people let them off the hook, though, for that reason. Cincinnati, not only was Cincinnati and Coastal completely overlooked, but Cincy was the only Group of 5 school that even managed to crack the top 10 this year. All right, we had BYU making noise earlier in the season. We had Coastal Carolina, Louisiana, ULL, the Raging Cajuns. They went up into Ames, Iowa, and they stuck it to Iowa State, who ironically ended up being the darlings of the college football playoff rankings because they could just keep losing games all day and they're going to stay in the top 10. So I'm looking at the final rankings here heading into the playoffs. You had Alabama number 1, Clemson at number 2, Ohio State 6-0 at number 3, Notre Dame 10-1 at number 4. Texas A&M was the odd team out at 8-1 at number 5. Oklahoma 8-2 at number 6. Florida 8-3 at number 7. And there we go, Cincinnati at 9-0, number 8, just ahead of the Georgia Bulldogs, who were 7-2, and Iowa State, who was 8-3. Take Indiana at number 11 at 6-1, and then you finally get to Coastal Carolina, who went 11-0 in the final standings there. So and then you got to jump all the way to number 19 to find the Raging Cajuns of Louisiana, whose only loss was by a field goal to Coastal Carolina late in the game. Very competitive game. And they couldn't even get ahead. The Raging Cajuns couldn't even get ahead of BYU in the standings, who finished 16th. So not a lot of respect. Not a lot of respect for those schools this year. What could your common knock be on the Group of 5, though? And you look at independent like BYU, will put them in that conversation. People said it was a weak schedule. The Bearcats, let's recap here. The Bearcats, they climbed as high as number 7 in the college football playoff rankings in week 14, thanks to wins over Army, Memphis, Houston, and UCF. Unlike their in-state counterpart, though, Ohio State, which held on to a playoff spot despite missing 3 games due to COVID cancellations, right? The college football committee, playoff committee, they felt like Cincinnati's COVID-related cancellations were enough to drop the Bearcats in the poll. They dropped from number 7 to number 9, which doesn't sound like a big drop, but when you're fighting for that number 4 spot, that's a huge drop. So in 2 weeks, Bearcats had canceled games. So from week 14, they went to number 7, week 16, number 9. Undefeated Cincinnati fell behind 2 lost teams such as Iowa State, Florida, and Georgia. So just zero. That's just no respect right there. That's no respect. And by the way, Iowa State, Florida, Georgia, all fantastic teams. We did see Georgia beat Cincinnati in the Peach Bowl, but it was a slugfest, and the Bearcats nearly came out with a victory in Georgia's backyard. So this Cincinnati team was good, and the consistency of dropping them in the polls for having games canceled while keeping Ohio State where they were, can't answer for it. You can't answer for it. BYU, they ended up starting 9-0. They were the team. I mean, they were the talk of the first couple months of college football, really. Because they weren't just winning, but Zach Wilson, who's going to be a very high pick in the NFL draft, I still don't think he's better than Justin Fields. Justin Fields is getting, did anybody else watch that Sugar Bowl against Clemson? Why is Justin Fields just being so overlooked in this draft? I mean, he's still top 5 in all the mocks, but I just feel like Zach Wilson is just taking this big leap while nobody's talking about Justin Fields. It's so weird. But BYU, they end up jumping out 9-0. The offense is fantastic. They crushed Navy to open the season, get a big win down at Houston, destroy Boise State on a Friday night. And it really looked at that point, you looked at their schedule after the Boise State game and said, who else is going to beat these guys? These guys are going to finish undefeated. And you thought they were going to be a shoo-in for New Year's Six Bowl. The problem is you have undefeated Cincinnati sitting ahead of them. So BYU was looking to enhance their resume. So they had a game against Army, which would have been good for their schedule. Played Cincinnati, lost to Cincinnati, a close game earlier in the season, by the way, Army and BYU were supposed to play in week 2, but there was COVID cancellation on that one. BYU, though, they end up hunting for a game, and we actually had Jay Drew on this podcast, a reporter covering BYU football for the Deseret News out in Utah, talk about it with us, where he said that BYU is actively searching for a game, and this was in early November, actively searching for a game because they wanted to ensure that they were going to have the resume to at least make a New Year's Six bowl. And at that point, we were even thinking there was a possibility, crazy outside possibility, that they can make the playoffs if they went undefeated. But unfortunately for the Cougars, they didn't rise above number 13 in the rankings at any point, and that was in week 14. BYU found itself behind two lost teams like Oklahoma, Iowa State, and Georgia. So no respect for BYU's schedule whatsoever. That was the claim of what was holding them back. So at the same time, you got unbeaten Coastal Carolina, got the Mullets, the big win over Kansas we talked about, the dancing, the Georgia Southern post-game celebration with the eagle and the wrestling moves off the, jump and break in a card table. Unbelievable stuff out of Coastal Carolina this season. They climbed up to number 18 in the polls despite a 9-0 start. Not really much from the committee there. Number 18 is not really much for a 9-0 start. The upside of this is that both Coastal Carolina and BYU were hungry for a matchup, and it ended up giving us one of the coolest moments in recent history in college football. So I'm going to get to that in a second, but college football has this weird habit of booking non-conference matchups 20 years into the future. Like, I get it, but to some extent, college football, like it's college football athletic directors are essentially playing musical chairs, and they want to make sure they get their games and they get them scheduled. So, hey, Florida's going to be playing Notre Dame in 2031. I mean, as fans, you got to admit that's pretty weird when you hear those announcements, but okay, whatever. But so we're talking about planning years in advance. So there's a downside to this approach, though. And I think it shows up every fall. We get a little taste of it every fall. Sometimes you get that rare matchup where you're really excited about it, and it ends up not being good because maybe that school has a down year in a given year. I go back to a couple years ago when Alabama waxed Southern Cal to open the season in Jerry's world, where I know that one wasn't booked a decade in advance, but these games, it should be a good game most years when programs like a Southern Cal or Alabama get together. And really, Alabama's in the top 5 level. Southern Cal should be there. They're just on a huge downturn right now. They've been on a downturn for a decade plus since the Pete Carroll days, but ends up being a crappy game. Bad game. Bama blowout. Southern Cal gets completely embarrassed, but Bama's at the peak of their powers. USC is down. It's not your grandfather's USC right now. It's not even your father's USC right now. Like the USC is just not playing where it should be. So while a game could look attractive a few years out, not so much if one program's going through a downside. So the other thing is when there are contract cancellations, these games get planned so far in advance that sometimes new administration comes in. They go, why did we schedule this game? Why are we playing a home and home with this team? What are we doing here? And they'll cancel games. They'll restructure what they do. It leaves teams in a tough spot. You hear about Power 5 programs regularly backing out of, if there's a 2-for-1 deal, a Power 5 team will opt out of a game and leave that Group of 5 team. If they have to return that trip to the Group of 5 school, they'll just pay the Group of 5 school to not make the return trip. And instead of playing someone like Michigan State or Wisconsin, you have to reschedule an FCS team. So your schedule looks really good, but then that game goes away, and all of a sudden you replace it with an FCS game. Good luck selling season tickets with that type of last-minute adjustments to your schedule. So doesn't always work out. It works the other way too, where a Group of 5 schools, they look at it and they go, we're trying to build a winning culture here. UCF did this in the late 2000s with George O'Leary. They lost 42-0 to Florida in 2006, and I think he actively complained about, why are we playing them again? What good is this doing our program right now? They end up paying Florida to get out of the game, to go back to Gainesville. But this is back in the day where UCF didn't even have the guts to ask for a trip to Orlando. Like now UCF, they're good enough to ask for those trips. Back then it wasn't the same. So I see it does cut both ways. I think UCF or Florida ended up replacing UCF on the next year's schedule with not a very interesting game. So it does cut both ways where you can leave each other in bad situations at times. The other thing is too, this type of scheduling, it really gives poor opportunities for the group of five. Someone like Boise State who comes on the scene, wins the Fiesta Bowl. I remember the next few years after that, they were playing opening day games, Labor Day games in these Virginia Tech in Landover, Maryland, Washington Redskins Stadium. They played Georgia in the Georgia Dome. They were getting these cool matchups on Labor Day. They'd bust out the fancy jerseys and everything. But how many times do you see those teams go play on the blue turf? Florida State was supposed to this year. Boise State came down to Jacksonville a couple years ago. Game ended up, Hurricane moved it over to Tallahassee. Boise State went into Tallahassee and beat the Noles, by the way. But FSU is supposed to go back this past year. COVID obviously canceled the trip. But I know a lot of Florida State fans who were excited for that game. They wanted to see the Seminoles play on the blue turf. People find that stuff interesting, but basically it's rare. You're not going to see these top Power 5 programs go to a group of 5 school. And back to the UCF Florida dilemma. Here in the Sunshine State, we witnessed this with UCF athletic director Danny White and Florida athletic director Scott Strickland over the nature of potential future series. White wanted a home and home, insisted upon it. Strickland said, we don't do that with group of 5 teams. We go 2 for 1. And then kind of throughout the Citrus Bowl, which used to be a terrible stadium, Camping World Stadium now has been redone in Orlando. The seats have been redone. Still not a huge fan of the stadium. I've seen it redone. I went to the old Citrus Bowl back in the day, and I went to the newly redone Camping World Stadium. Camping World, big upgrade over the Citrus Bowl. Still not my favorite stadium to go to. Would much prefer. I've been to a game in the Bounce House too, and I'd much prefer to go see a game in the Bounce House, even though there's fewer tickets, which is the point of wanting to play it in Camping World from the Florida perspective. But UCF insisted we have to have it on campus, and we want a home and home. That was a deal breaker. Series never happened. But Danny White goes to Tennessee, leaves the UCF job. I'm pretty positive he's not reaching out to Tulane for a home and home series with the Vols. I don't think SMU or Tulsa is going to be getting a call from Knoxville, Tennessee saying, what do you guys think about a home and home? It's not happening. Now that Danny White's on the other side of the aisle, I don't see that happening much. It's nice to ask for it. You can posture all you want for it, but now that you're on the other side of the aisle, you're probably not going to see that out of Tennessee. But his public griping did highlight a significant disparity in scheduling practices. And it's an interesting conversation because you understand that the disparities exist, but if you're a group of 5 athletic director with a solid football profile to maintain, those big time schools, those Power 5 schools, they're not going to treat you fairly. They're not going to give you the exact, you're not going to get that 1-for-1 reciprocation. You might be able to go, I think we saw Arkansas and Colorado State. Some ADs seemed up for it. I don't know why Miami did a home and home with Arkansas State or Appalachian State. There was Miami, University of Miami, Toledo. They went to Toledo. I mean, there was an administration there who booked some goofy home and homes, and even Hurricane fans were like, what are we doing? Aren't we Miami? What are we doing here? But you see it once in a while, but very rarely. I mean, maybe some Midwestern type situations where a MAC school might get an occasional visit from a Big Ten. Maybe you go play in Soldier Field or something like that if you're NIU. Okay, but true home and homes, not a thing between Power 5, Group 5 schools. So Group 5, get together, man. Stop relying on Power 5. They're not going to let you in their little club. How can you help each other out? This year, Boise goes to Orlando in the Bounce House to open the season. Let's hope to God we have a regular season with fans and everything, because that is a hell of a game right out off the bat. But it's hard to project who's going to be good 10 years from now. So college football, we need to stop this nonsense. We need to stop. Like, if Boise State were to have a down year 10 years from now and UCF and Boise had a series on the books, all of a sudden that game's just another game. But it's going to be a big game this year because they're both going to be ranked and they're both going to be up. So the Group of 5, instead of falling into this trap that the Power 5 does, You need to just cut off this future schedule. Maybe even get together and make a rule as athletic directors. Look, we're not going to schedule more than 2 to 3 years in the future. Hell, I wouldn't even say do that far. Just maybe every single year, pick it out and get together as a group of 5 and put the most attractive teams together in a non-conference setting. I think that'd be awesome. But the one thing we learned this year in a 2020 Franken season of college football is that college football can function like on the fly. We saw this. So one of the things I wrote in the article, I wrote on November 15, 2031, the Florida Gators will travel to South Bend, Indiana to take on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Stop and think about that for a second. If you're listening to this, odds are I just let you know what you've done, what you're doing on November 15, 2031. If you're a big-time college football fan, you're probably tuning in for Florida and Notre Dame. That's probably going to get some attention on that day. But that's 1 year shy of 3 presidentials away. Presidential elections away. You're 3 presidential elections away from that. Why are we scheduling games like this? It is so weird. I know nothing else about my life in 2031. I do know the Florida Gators are playing the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, though. It's so weird. We got to get it. It'll create better matchups if we allow it to happen more organically closer to the time we pick it. Maybe Notre Dame gets slapped with some penalties and they're down. Maybe Florida, same thing. Maybe, if Florida's in one of its downswings, it's not going to be as fun to go to Notre Dame that year. You want to see Florida and Notre Dame get together at the height of their programs. How many times has Florida made a trip to Notre Dame in the history of their school? Zero. So I want to see the one time in history Florida gets to go to South Bend. I hope it's a good Florida team, but fingers crossed, because 2031, who's going to be the coach? I don't know. Who's going to be the quarterback? I don't know. We're talking about 2031. You know nothing about it. It's so weird that we're living this way. So let's go back to this season here. Let's go back to the BYU situation. After losing the Army game, a lot of flexibility in college football. BYU openly started campaigning to get another game. The Pac-12 decided to open things up on their end and allow some non-conference scheduling. There was some rumors that BYU was going to play Washington after a cancellation for the Huskies. Fell through. There's a little trash talking going on about it where, hey, BYU is talking about wanting this game, but they don't want to come up here. I don't know what happened on that it didn't work out. But unlike the Washington situation where you got a Pac-12 team maybe throwing you a bone at the last second, there was a team that was in need of help. Coastal Carolina, group of 5 brother for BYU here. They had the same problem as BYU. Both of them were behind the Bearcats for that New Year's 6 bowl bid, and they both needed a good win to kind of help their resume. Liberty, who lost 1 game this season on a field goal that was blocked at the last second at NC State. They won a game on a blocked field goal against Virginia Tech, or I should say a blocked field that was a field goal. They actually kicked the field goal to win after it was blocked. So they almost lost 2 games on blocked field goals this year, but they only lost 1. They lost the 1. Virginia Tech had a penalty. NC State didn't. So NC State gets the blocked field goal. Liberty loses a game. So Liberty's coming in with 1 loss to play Coastal Carolina. And at the last minute, a few days before the game, midweek, they have to cancel the game because of COVID situation. The disappointing part was these 2 teams were going to have the national spotlight. It wasn't a particularly strong weekend of football. I think LSU and Bama, which is normally a highlight game every year, and nobody was looking forward to it this year with LSU being down. And it was absolutely terrible. Liberty and Coastal Carolina were going to get a little run. And College Game Day decided, hey, we're going to go to Coastal. We're going to go check out this game. So you got College Game Day coming to town. Coastal Carolina is getting some shine on the national attention. They weren't getting respect in the polls, but people love their style. They like the mullets. They like the colors on the field, the teal turf. They were just a fun team this year. So they were getting the attention they deserved and that they had earned. Liberty bails out. Tough situation. But last second, it's a legend at this point, but BYU, they send their trucks out before the game's even even booked, but BYU just says drive east. We'll let you know if we're playing. And within a few days, they put together what's basically a backyard football game where these two schools go in. BYU comes into Coastal, into Conway, South Carolina, and ends up playing what was very similar to the Tennessee Titans and St. Louis Rams Super Bowl, the ending of that, where BYU loses on the last second of the goal line. But we saw a physical game where the BYU offense they were having some trouble with a real physical defense in Coastal Carolina. Zach Wilson throws a pick, and two Coastal guys are knocking him down multiple times. On two defenders are knocking him down multiple times. You're getting a fight on the field, near fight on the field because of it. I mean, this game had it all. Coastal comes back in the fourth quarter. BYU led at one point. BYU had a good shot to win this game. I mean, this was a back and forth affair that most of us chose to watch over LSU and Alabama. Think about how crazy that is. Coastal Carolina BYU was a much more attractive game than Alabama and LSU. That doesn't happen many years. So ends up being the most watched game on ESPNU that weekend, by the way. So with so much on the line, they end up getting that game done. College game day sticks around, and college football fans, my opinion, that was one of the best games, if not the best game of the season. And so that was a real treat. So I think you look at it and you can say nothing else but call it a hit. Like, I mean, it was a real hit. And I think that thanks to the playoff like atmosphere between two radically different programs from opposite ends of the country, it just had all the makings. I mean, someone had a t-shirt, Mormons versus Mullets. I mean, it had all the makings of a great game. And ESPN afterward reported that not only was it the top viewed game, it set a record with its ESPNU's highest television rating since 2015, but it was also the top college football video clip in week 14 across ESPN's digital platform, meaning people were searching for that game. They want to see the highlights on it. So the popularity was there, and it really showed this game, the BYU Coastal game, needs to be studied. It needs to be looked into by athletic directors. It needs to be looked into by TV executives. It needs to be looked into by all of college football, especially the group of 5 teams, because this game came together within a few days, and it was fantastic, and the fans eat it up. So you normally think, I need a name brand program to get a big rating. People just want to see good football, man. Doesn't matter who it is. Now, if LSU and Alabama are worth, they're ranked teams, they're going to crush BYU and Coastal, even if BYU and Coastal are good. But if you give the games meaning and you put them later in the season, we've seen a lot of Alabama and LSU. BYU Coastal, that's new. That was fun to watch. The group of 5's got something to offer. They have an audience. And you could draw people in who are football fans elsewhere if you put on a great game like they did. So I want to look at this, and I'm going to say, so let me, sorry, I'm going through my notes here. Yeah, they get 1.4 million video starts. ESPN's digital platform, the Cougars and Chanticleers end up getting 1.4 million video starts on their game. So, I mean, a lot of people tuning in on the ESPN digital platforms. So, what takeaway? So, clearly popular, right? Clearly popular. People wanted to see that game. People tuned in. Even though it was last minute, it was well promoted, but it was at the last minute. And I think between the success of both teams, Zach Wilson becoming a top prospect, I don't know much about Coastal at the time. People are just learning Jamie Chadwell's name. They're learning about Garrett Grayson. They're learning about these different players on both the teams. It was an interesting matchup, and I think people tuned in and they wanted it. There was a demand for it. So I'm going to say the biggest takeaway you take from that game is that when provided a proper stage, the right group of 5 schools can demand an audience just like any Power 5 team. And, I say any Power 5 team. College basketball and college football, they have the same separations of powers. But the difference is like we just don't give the attention to the little guy in college football. We know that we already know that we love Cinderella teams. We do this every March. George Mason, VCU, Butler, Florida Gulf Coast, Dunk City. They've all captured our attention for extended stretches. We know they could shine on a national stage. Now, will these schools ever truly compare to Kentucky, Duke, North Carolina, or Kansas on the basketball court? No. But that's why we're drawn to them, because we know it's a shooting star. It's a limited amount of time. It's here for a moment and it's gone. So unlike college football, where winning your conference triggers an automatic bid into the NCAA tournament, the College Football Playoff Committee doesn't even provide the slightest glance to schools that aren't in the Power Five. So you have 130 schools in the FBS in college football. Power Five is half of that. 65 and 65 splits right down the middle. So you're telling me that half the teams that play in your sport are automatically ineligible because they don't have the right conference affiliation next to their name. And that's got to infuriate you. I mean, even if you like, again, like I root for big programs. I'm objectively, I went to Florida. I'm a Gator, and I like the Buckeyes. It's a weird combo. I grew up with the Buckeyes. I went to school at Florida, like the Gators. Power programs, right? It pisses me off that half the sport is completely ineligible to not play for it, because there are some years where Ohio State and Florida just don't put those type of teams on the field to win national titles. Now, if they're good enough to win a national title, like by all means, like I'll get out. You know, hey, Florida knocked off those George Mason and FG Florida Gulf Coast teams in the NCAA tournament. Like, there's times where you root for Cinderella to fall. Like, I'm not rooting for Cinderella across the board. I'm still rooting for my teams, but when they're deserving, give them a shot. That's all I'm saying. So to completely eliminate half of them from the get-go is insanity. And if you don't agree with that, I don't know, you're boring. Like, why wouldn't it be fun to watch Boise State make a title run? Like, try explaining. Imagine teaching the sport. You're teaching the sport to, you got a young son. You got a buddy that just moved over here from the United Kingdom. He's trying to learn about college football. Someone, your wife, anyone who's learning college football, and you're trying to teach them about the sport. And you have to tell them right off the bat that, hey, Kansas, who we just talked about, Kansas has a better shot to make the playoff than Boise State. Kansas is really bad normally. Boise State's usually pretty good. But Kansas has a better shot than Boise State to make the playoff. They'd say, why is that the case? Because Kansas is in the Big 12, and the Big 12 is a Power 5 conference. Like, you know, then you got Vanderbilt in the SEC. Why are they in the SEC? Right place, right time in the 1930s, baby. Like, and hey, Vandy, you win your national titles, and thank you for representing the SEC in baseball and bowling. You're not doing a whole lot in football, though. I love the Clark Lee hire, and we intend on doing an episode on Vanderbilt at some point in the offseason here, a deep dive on the Vandy program, because I like what's going on there. But let's be real. I mean, SEC, they have not, what's happened in Vanderbilt has not warranted SEC football status over the years. They're definitely riding some coattails there in Nashville. But why do they have a better shot to make the playoff than UCF? Well, they're an SEC school. All right. Yeah, let's be Oregon State. Oregon State has a better shot than BYU. How many national titles has Oregon State won? BYU's won one. Like, BYU won one in the 1980s as an independent. Back in the day when sometimes you could get a weird result in the polls. That was the year where Florida got hit with sanctions and BYU snuck up in the polls and they were a surprise national champion. But we don't have that. That's probably the last national champion that was outside. I mean, outside the Power 5, right? I mean, outside of Notre Dame. Notre Dame's included. It's Power 5 and Notre Dame, right? But I just it's outrageous. It really is, and it's something that I'm not saying that you should automatically that these teams should be treated as equal all the time. But what I'm saying is, like, don't tell me that something Don't like we do this Power 5 label. So you basically have zero chance of winning a national title if you're not a Power 5 team. So 65 teams go this way, 65 teams go that way on opening day. But of the 65 teams we let in the room, Vanderbilt, Oregon State, Kansas, come on. Like, you are a Power 5 program in name only. And yes, you've had some good teams here or there, but not most years in name only. Like, let's go. Purdue collects a fat check from the Big Ten because they were in the right place at the right time. If the Big Ten was being created today, would Purdue be in it? I don't know. Like, you could tell me about, Greasy and Woodson and Breeze. Like, I know they've had some history at Purdue. You had that one night against Ohio State. But let's be real. The Boilers, they're rarely more than a punching bag for the Big Ten elite. They're not. But they're also not the only Big Ten school who draw their days of being elite back to a couple fellas named Greasy and Woodson. There's another Big Ten school out there that does that too. I would really argue that 2/3 of the Power 5 schools wouldn't come close to winning Group of 5 conference titles in a given year. And we see Group of 5 teams knock off Power 5 teams every single season. I mean, you see teams like Tulsa, teams like UCF went into Georgia Tech and handled them last year. I know Georgia Tech's not great. We talked about that earlier right now, but Power 5 or the Group of 5 at a high level, they can compete they would be in the upper third of the Power 5 probably. So let's talk about another Rutgers over Boise State or UCF. You taking them most year? That's a Power 5 team. That's the way we run things right now. So I don't know, man. I don't know. I feel like I've made my point. I don't need to throw any more examples out there, but it's time to recognize, though, that the Group of 5 has some untapped potential. We're not giving them full credit right now. College football is wasting half of its inventory. So how do we fix the solution? This is not an argument vouching for all of the Group of 5. Just like the Power 5, there's some Group of 5 that they're not up there. And even for the top levels of the Group of 5, if Boise State doesn't go out and play anybody, if they don't have the courage to go schedule those road games at Georgia, Virginia Tech, or wherever you got to go in the country to get a game, and you just feast on a bunch of weak opponents, you stay home, you play Idaho, you go, maybe Washington State, a 3-9 Washington State's your big win of the year against a Power 5 team. Like, I don't really care if you're undefeated in that case. I'll look at you, but go out and get a win. Go out and get a win. Go to Orlando. Go make an effort in the schedule. Like, if a Power 5 schools won't schedule us, top level Group of 5 schools will, because they'll give you a home and home too. Like, so go out and get some good games on your schedule so you have the wins and you're not just dependent on your conference. So I want the undefeated teams from the Group of 5 to get their look, but they're not going to be handed a ticket into the playoffs simply for being undefeated. Again, I want to reiterate, this is not vouching for every Power 5 team out there. If you're undefeated and you don't make the effort, you play garbage non-conference games, and you played a weak schedule in conference, sorry. You get the same treatment you're getting right now. Make it difficult on the playoff committee. Go out there, schedule those games. Boise State, nobody will come play us. Nobody wants to play Boise State anymore. Maybe that's true. Maybe big programs are like, yeah, we don't need that headache. Fine. But UCF will play you Boise State. Get that home with UCF. Make sure, if you can't rely on the Power 5 to give you an attractive game, go find it within the Group of 5. And those schools got to stick together. So that's what I'm saying. Get the Group of 5 together before every single year. Make sure you line up a couple of attractive games in the non-conference segment of the schedule. If you can get a Power 5 matchup, great, go get it. But if you need help, like, hey, has UCF found anyone this year? Let's go here. Fresno State's good this year. Let's pair Fresno State. We've seen Fresno State be the undefeated darling. We've seen Hawaii. Make sure those two are playing. I mean, they're conference foes, but make sure Tulsa, Memphis, and Fresno State are playing this year, type of thing. So you can go and get creative with it. But I think the Group of 5 should pick those games out every July or if you want to plan it sooner, maybe like, every, I don't know, like May or April or whatever. So group of 5 should come together, bolster their schedules of their best teams. And I really think it could lead to a group of 5 school finally being selected into one of the 4 playoff spots. So I want to go conference by conference here. And really, in the article, I went conference by conference. For the sake of the podcast, I'll just use one conference as an example. We'll use the American Athletic Conference, and Cincinnati was your conference champion last year. So aside from getting together before the season to create some better matchups in non-conference, if needed, Boise State's got a road game at Oklahoma. Don't change that. You're fine. Go play it. Go get it. But if you need that extra quality game, help each other out. G5, get together. G5 Summit, get together every March. Figure it out every April, whenever. The other thing I want the group of 5 to do is I want them to play a more flexible schedule in general. And what do I mean by that? I mean, play 6 to 7 conference games, depending on the conference. And really, you can actually bump that number with the model we saw this year. And I'll explain that in a second. But I want almost the same amount of conference games, basically. Cut it down to 2 non-conference games at the beginning of the year to open the season. 6-7 conference games, conference championship weekend. And on the conference championship weekend, you have the top 2 teams play, or the 2 division winners, however you have it structured. And then you have the other teams match up based on how they finish, similar to what we saw in the Big Ten this year. The SEC did the same thing on Championship Sunday or Saturday, where other teams were playing. I think like Tennessee played Texas A&M that Saturday before Florida and Alabama, or Florida and Alabama played. I think that was one of the games. But we could look at that. Yeah, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, LSU, Missouri, Mississippi State. They all played the same day as Florida and Alabama did in the SEC. And the Big Ten did the same thing. So you could play other games the day the championship games come on, and you could use those games as feeder games into that too. So I think that's totally fine. But what I want to see at the end of the season, the last 3 weeks of every season, is a mini playoff from the group of 5. And what I mean by mini playoff is you take the 8 best group of 5 teams, 5 group of 5 conferences, the winners of each conference, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3 wild cards. How are you going to pick the wild cards? The goal of our group of 5 mini playoff at the end of the regular season here is twofold. One, you want to basically give the winner of this thing 3 quality wins against 3 really solid group of 5 programs. We'll explain later why that's important. The other thing you want to do is drive television ratings. So imagine every single year getting later in the season, the group of 5 plays their conference championship game earlier than anyone else. They play in early to mid-November with the conference title games. It'll give them a platform and a stage that other conferences do not have. And then the last 3 weeks of the season, you got the top 8 teams playing out for a mini playoff to basically the whole goal, bolster, not only get TV ratings, but bolster the resume of the best group of 5 team so that they have a chance to get selected on Selection Sunday for the college football playoff. If you don't make that top 8, let's say you're Toledo and you're not one of the 8 best group of 5 teams, go schedule those 3 games. Let them schedule those 3 games. Whoever you want. You want to play Big Ten team? Go play Big Ten team. You want to play whoever you want to play. But you're probably going to have to stick in the group of 5 on those weekends because the FBS probably they're going to be doing conference play. So if Toledo wants to go down to Birmingham and play some. Well, actually, they're in my playoffs, so I'm not going to use them. But Toledo wants to hook up with Marshall. By all means, play. USF and FIU. USF, Georgia Southern has never played. USF has never played Georgia Southern, and they're so close to each other. They're only a few hour drive away. They've never played each other. So you can get some matchups like that at the end of the season if you're not in the final 8. But the main priority is that final 8 so we can bolster that top team. And so I'll give you an example in the American Conference. Right now, it's an 11-team conference thanks to UConn's exodus after the 2019 season. And the AAC is no longer split into divisions. But you can still make this work. This year, the 2020 champion, Cincinnati, they're scheduled to play 8 conference games in 2021. But the AAC title would serve as the 9th conference game. Under the new format that I'm proposing, Cincinnati would still play 8 total games in the conference, whether or not they make the AAC championship game. Because all Group of 5 title games will take place on a Saturday in mid-November. This will allow their title games to stand out and not compete with Power 5 for attention on the same weekend. Power 5 title games for attention on the same weekend. And like I said, if you don't make the Group of 5 title game, we'll follow the model they did this year. Like where the SEC, other schools played outside of Florida and Alabama on the day of the SEC championship game. For Cincinnati here, I'm gonna tell you what their schedule is. This is their original schedule heading into 2021. They're playing Miami, Ohio, Murray State at home. They go on the road to Indiana, bye week at Notre Dame, versus Temple, versus UCF, at Navy, at Tulane, versus Tulsa, at USF, SMU, at East Carolina on November 27th. AAC Championship, American Athletic Conference Championship game is December 4th. That's their schedule right now. Under my adjusted proposed schedule, you could do something like this. Miami of Ohio at home. You keep that Notre Dame matchup. Temple, UCF, at Navy, at Tulane. And we're at October 9th right now. We're 6 games in. Bye week. Tulsa at USF and SMU to finish the season on November 6th would be the finish of the regular season. November 13th would be the American Athletic Conference Championship game. And we'll call it Championship Saturday. If you're not in the game, you got a matchup. So if Cincinnati were to make the AAC Championship, let's say they're playing UCF. Cincinnati UCF play. Let's say they don't make it. Maybe they pair off and they play with they play with someone like that they haven't played in the season. So let's say they play like East Carolina on that day. So you're getting a game that day. It's just whether or not you're going to be in the conference championship or not. After that, the next 3 Saturdays will be dedicated to the mini playoff. So November 20th would be round 1. November 27th this year would be round 2. And December 4th would be round 3 of the mini playoff. Once you lose a game in the mini playoff, I think that's a good enough season. We could call that a season. Maybe if you want to mix the pool and do pool play after that, that's fine. I'm more concerned about building a top resume here. So let's say Cincinnati was that top team in the G5 mini playoff this year. How would it look? How would it have looked this year? Well, I went ahead and created a mock bracket, basically. And again, this features 8 teams, 5 group of 5 champions plus 3 group of 5 wild card. Each game will take place in the home stadium of the highest seed. I'm not a big committee guy. I'm not a big, let's have a bunch of meetings guy. So I don't when I hear the word committee, I'm immediately turned off by it. So forget about another committee here. just be delivered. We don't need ex-players, coaches, or athletic director. So the point of this, again, is to allow the top group of 5 school gain 3 extra quality wins heading into playoff consideration, and 2, drive television ratings. Since 5 positions are auto bids, we only need 3 more wild cards. I say you just sell your soul because we've done it already. Just let the TV executives pick the 3 wild cards. It's just 3 wild cards, guys. They're going to pick the best matchups possible to put on TV. Let them pick the seedings. Let them pick the wild cards. Let them do it. Just give it, because you care about that stuff. Your group of 5, what's going to get us the most attention? All right. So here's what I would have done for the mini playoff bracket this year. The number 1 seed would have been Cincinnati. They would have opened up with the number 8 seed, Liberty. All right. Liberty, like I said, 1 loss, and they ended up in the bowl game. Looking back on it, they had a great season. They ended up beating Coastal in the bowl game too. But Cincinnati, Liberty, round 1, that would have been at Nippert Stadium. The 2 seed, Coastal Carolina, would have played UAB, hosted the Blazers at home, right? So you got Coastal, who had their conference championship game canceled against Louisiana, but they did beat Louisiana in the regular season, if that means anything to you. Coastal gets that 2 seed. Both those teams were undefeated. Number 7 seed, UAB, who won Conference USA. The 3 seed would have been BYU, and they would have hosted San Jose State out in Provo. The 4 seed, the Louisiana Raging Cajuns, 1 loss, only to Coastal Carolina, very close. That's what, even though you don't have to, the seeding has nothing to do with whether or not you won your conference. The seeding is straight up who we think the best teams are. They play the 5th seed, MAC champion Ball State Cardinals, who I did rank in the 5th seed because they ended up beating San Jose State, who won the Mountain West this year in a bowl game. So I'm doing a little revisionist history on that. They may not have been the 5th seed heading into that, but so you got, to recap, 1 versus 8, Cincinnati, Liberty. 2 versus 7, Coastal Carolina, UAB. 3 versus 6, BYU, San Jose State. 4 versus 5, Louisiana, Ball State, Raging Cajuns, Cardinals. If you play that out, you're going to have Cincinnati winning the thing if the top seed wins across the board. But your second round matchups would have been Cincinnati, Louisiana, Coastal, BYU. BYU going to Coastal, Louisiana going to Cincinnati, with your final being Coastal Carolina at Cincinnati. So if you're a Coastal fan, you get to see a matchup against UAB, BYU, and Louisiana, and Cincinnati. Sorry, let's recap there. If you're a Coastal fan, you get to see UAB, BYU, and then on a road at Cincinnati. If you're a Cincinnati fan, you get to see Liberty, Louisiana, and then Coastal all come into Nippert Stadium. By the way, hey, get these boys from Louisiana and South Carolina coming up to play at Ohio in late November. The other thing with the timing of this, it's the week before Thanksgiving weekend, and Conference Championship Saturday. These are heavy TV viewing. I think most people are taking some time off of work. They'll have a chance to travel for these games potentially. I think these games would crush. If you're a big-time fan of these programs, you're essentially getting to see your teams play on a national stage against other ranked teams in the group of 5. This would be awesome for the group of 5. So it's important to note that the proposed G5 mini playoff is not an automatic qualifier for the college football playoff. UAB, who we put as the 7 seed in this bracket, by the way, maybe Liberty should have been that 7 seed, huh? We could argue about the seeding on that all you want, but I did give UAB the edge on that. But they ended up having 3 losses. If they end up making it through the field and they were the winner of this mini playoff, sorry, group of 5, you're not going to the college football playoff. But if Cincinnati got through it, then you got a better resume for your top team. So just to recap, I know I've said this about 3 or 4 times now. The whole goal of this mini playoff is to simply allow the top group of 5 school to gain 3 extra quality wins to bolster their resume in front of the college football playoff selection committee. And then the number 2, of course, drive television ratings, right? Good for business. More money coming into your schools. Good for business. So assuming the top seeds won in each round, we did that. Cincinnati's our winner. If Cincinnati went through and got those 3 extra quality wins against Liberty, who was ranked this year, Louisiana, who was ranked, and Coastal Carolina, who was ranked, that's 3 quality wins that they would have tacked on to the 3 ranked wins that they had against Army, number 22 Army. Cincinnati originally on their schedule beat number 22 Army, number 15 SMU, and number 22 Tulsa. They would have got 3 more ranked wins. So that's 6 ranked victories for the Bearcats. 6. For comparison, Alabama had 4 ranked wins on its resume. Clemson only beat 2 ranked teams, and one of them was Notre Dame, who had beaten them before. Clemson won 2 ranked games. Ohio State, they had 3 ranked wins, one of which was Penn State, by the way. Didn't have a good season. Notre Dame had 2 ranked wins. So, with Cincinnati sitting there with 6 ranked wins, can you tell me they have a weak schedule if they have 6 ranked wins? The group of 5 will never get the benefit of the doubt from the College Football Playoff Committee. But if they put it together, if someone puts together an unbeaten resume and you got 6 ranked wins on that resume, that would be pretty difficult to ignore if you're the College Football Playoff Committee. So, group of 5 mini playoff would put a national spotlight on these programs as well. And it'd be at the end of the year on the holiday season, around the holiday season, when people are paying very close attention to how things are wrapping up in the college football world. And I think it would make a ton of extra money for the group of 5 schools. So that's my group of 5 mini playoff idea. I think it's a hell of an idea. I think it should start right away. It was totally inspired by what BYU and Coastal Carolina did this year. Love the element of backyard football. And it adds another element of do or die into the equation for the group of 5 schools, and it makes a half the inventory that we're not using right now in college football. It makes them a lot more interesting, and it makes them a lot more competitive. I'm not a guy who's pushing for playoff expansion. I think 4 teams is enough. I just think we got to get the right 4 teams. And I think if the group of 5 wants to be in that conversation, they need to put their heads together and figure something out. And if they don't, then you should, ESPN. Get it done. Fox Sports, college football, get this done. Get this done, big-time network executives. Because I would watch. These games would kill. College Game Day would be there. It puts all the group of 5 on a different stage where you're paying more attention. And any NFL fan knows that the top college football players aren't all playing in the Power 5. You got a lot of good players that fly under the radar in the group of 5 schools, and it would be fun to watch more of their games. To actually, if they're on the right stage, maybe on that Saturday where you're watching, 4-4 Ole Miss play 3-5 Arkansas, you could be watching 9-0 Tulsa play, 10-0 Colorado State in the snow. Up in Lubbock, Colorado, or not Lubbock. I was thinking sunny Lubbock. Up in Fort Collins, Colorado. So I think more people would probably watch that game. Tulsa playing in the snow up in Fort Collins. I think more people watch that game over like 2 mid-level teams in a Power 5 conference. So we'll see. Hopefully this thing gets out there. Hopefully people agree that it could be a possibility, but I think the college football needs to wake up and stop wasting half of its inventory. This has been another episode of American Football Stories. My name is Nick Knudsen. I'll send this out with a word from our sponsor, Coach Paint. American Football Stories is brought to you by Coach Paint. Coach Paint is a great tool that allows us to add graphics to player highlight clips similar to the graphics you see on TV. Coach Paint offers the ability to clearly tell a straight video while increasing retention of information in a shorter amount of time. Up your game with Coach Paint today.
Thank you for listening to American Football Stories podcast. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, American Football Stories. We are working to grow our network on YouTube and we'd love to have you subscribe. You can find us also on Apple Podcasts, on Twitter, at American FB Story, and on our website, AmericanFootballStories.com. I am Robert Parker. My co-host is Nick Knudsen. This has been another episode of American Football Stories.